All right, so I recently discovered a new podcast that I've added to my rotation. It's called Off Bounds by host Paula Macaggi. And today I want to share some takeaways that I had from one of her most recent episodes, an interview with the SVP of Innovation at Schwarz Digital, which is one of the largest retailers in Europe, more stores than Walmart globally. It is the parent company of Lidl and Kaufland with 14,000 stores across 30 countries. And what was interesting about this conversation is that Mirko Saul, this executive, shares how he and his team approach technological innovation, how they choose which problems to solve with new tech vendors, how they source tech vendors, how they vet them, how they pilot new technology, and ultimately roll it out in their stores. And while the conversation focuses on store technology, I really enjoyed hearing about Marco's framework for identifying and selecting and measuring these tech partnerships. And I think that a lot of those same principles apply in the world of retail media and e-commerce, even if we're not talking about physical stores and scanning products and things like that. So I'm going to share some of my takeaways from that conversation and recap real quick how we can learn from it in retail media. Let's go. Good morning and welcome to the Retail Media Breakfast Club. I'm your host, Kiri Masters, and every weekday at 6 a.m. Eastern, I bring you candid and real discussions in the world of retail media and marketplaces in just 10 minutes. So bring your own cup of coffee and we'll get smarter about retail media together. Okay, so I have 6 big takeaways from how the Schwarz Digital team approaches innovation. The first is problem-first technology scouting. So it's easy to be chasing shiny objects, especially you're going to shop talk or trade shows and there's all these vendors and vendors are constantly pitching you, whether you're a retailer or a brand or an agency. It's just like this flood of, hey, we have the best solution for this problem and we're the Uber of whatever. I certainly felt this on the agency side, just constant pitches from tech companies, and it can be overwhelming. And so the place that this innovation team starts with is, what's the problem? Come first with the problem, and then you search for the technology that could solve the problem. He says, of course, retail as an industry is notoriously cost sensitive, and that's particularly the case with Schwarz, with its value proposition for Lidl of, it's super low cost, super lean, highly value oriented. And so he wants to avoid what he calls innovation theater. Having said that, he says sometimes they'll start with something new and shiny or emerging technology if there is a clear potential benefit, but it still has to align with the overarching strategy of the store brands. Second step is preliminary research and vetting. And in order to find potential partners, they do scout through multiple channels. Mirko says that his team engages with universities, attends industry events, taps direct partnerships with large tech companies, and really stays on the pulse of relevant tech development. So they're not waiting for vendors to come to them. They're out there pursuing and finding out who is the best of the best. And he says that when they hear a pitch, they do a quick gut check using, their prior knowledge and experience to make that first pass. And he said that only a fraction of pitches align well enough to merit the next step. The next step is interesting. It's lab testing. They have a fully built out physical lab store, he says, where they can test out technology in an almost real environment. Everything is there, aisles, checkout lanes, back room, etc., but there's no customers. So it is built the exact same layout, and a typical process like scanning an item or stocking a shelf can be performed just as in a live store, but it is done with employees of this lab store rather than interfering with the real store operations or disrupting customers and things like that. So they're able to simulate in this environment to see how the technology performs in typical scenarios. Step number 4 is having defined KPIs from day one. And so this sort of seems like an obvious one, but Mirko says that this is one of the most surprisingly difficult steps. He says we agree on KPIs, so what we want to achieve. Otherwise, you just test and then what? And so they have a measurement discipline that forces stakeholders to define success criteria before investing resources. The reason why this is difficult, a few different reasons. One is lack of historical benchmarks. When you're talking about innovation, it's something that's never been done before. So there's no past data and there's no clear standard to measure success against. That's a big problem. Number 2, there could be many possible success indicators. Different teams prioritize different success metrics, making it tough to settle on a single set of KPIs. Another one is cross-functional stakeholder buy-in, so aligning on performance measures. Another is that tech's real impact can emerge mid-test. There can be unforeseen benefits or drawbacks that only become clear after the pilots are underway. Could be something great, or it could be something negative. And so while this step is challenging, without predefined metrics, you risk testing for testing's sake. So that's a really important part of the process and step number 4 out of 6. Step number 5 is incremental store rollouts. So if the tech proves valuable in the lab, it moves into a handful of real stores or warehouses. How many? He says it's not just one store, but it's also not 10 or 20 stores for the initial real-world evaluation. That limited test run allows for troubleshooting at a manageable scale before committing to full deployment across potentially thousands or even 10,000 stores. And then the final step, integration first evaluation. Even if a technology works, it has to be cost-effective at Schwarz Group scale. So they examine the total cost of ownership, the ability to integrate with existing retail operations. So that's, all the different systems, point of sale, inventory systems, data lakes, etc. And then also the capacity of the vendor to support thousands of stores across 30 different countries. So this scale piece, the decision to roll out or not comes after this evaluation. Right, so that's their framework. I think it's super interesting. There's some clear takeaways, even in situations where we're not talking about physical stores. So first of all, it's tying tech solutions back to core business goals. So starting out with what are those pain points, what is the business objective, and working back from that rather than, what's hot right now, like, agentic, whatever. What is the problem that agentic is solving? Actually, I think Lauren Schiavone said this in our previous series, that AI is not a strategy. It's an enabler. Yeah. So next, takeaway for retail media is how can you simulate this kind of lab environment that Schwarz have? I think this is a really interesting concept. What can you do that isolates, the potential negative impacts from a test from the rest of your business? It may not be as clean as setting up, a physical store, which is completely isolated from operations. But, what a lot of brands do is they start with a small sub-brand as a test only in certain categories, obviously just testing in a single region, etc. So isolating those variables as much as possible and create your own lab store. Another one is around vendor scalability. Just like Schwarz Group demands that prospective technology partners can handle thousands and thousands of stores, you need to validate that a vendor can handle your existing and projected volume and fit into your roadmap. Another one I didn't touch on so much in the takeaways was actually around sovereignty and integration. And Mirko talks about data sovereignty. Because they're in the EU, they need to stick to European rules around GDPR. They came to the conclusion that for their cloud system, they could not actually outsource that to anyone. It was really important to them. It was critical for legal reasons, and external providers couldn't guarantee that customer data would only be in Europe and wouldn't be used to train AI models. So they decided to build that in-house. And so I think for retail media teams, this is also a critical question. What, if any, components of your tech stack are strategic enough to warrant in-house development versus external partnerships? And I think it is possible. Many times the true number is 0, but in specific cases, that might be necessary. And then another takeaway that was interesting from the interview was be willing to shelve technologies. And Mirko talks about very candidly technologies that looked promising but failed to scale. And he talks about autonomous store technology as an example of this. And he says, we rapidly realize it doesn't work on a large scale store. It works technology-wise, but it didn't work commercially in their store format. And so, solutions often change quickly. Some promising ideas never pan out, and a quick kill can save months of wasted time. So that is my quick takeaway of this interview on the Off Bounds podcast with Mirko Saul of Schwarz Digital. Recommend checking that podcast out, and I'll catch you next time. Well, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Retail Media Breakfast Club. We meet here every day at 6 a.m. Eastern. So be sure to subscribe and get your daily dose of insights, trends, and hot takes in the world of retail media and marketplaces.